Okay, I'm recording to the computer. Okay, so we're going to do three things today. One is I want to talk about the expansion of the ACOP as a self-study guide. Okay, and that'll take about 5 or 10 minutes. And then I have a case study I want to go over, which talks about story writing. I'm convinced user story. I've never really liked user stories. At the beginning, they were okay, but they ran into a lot of problems. If you use them as a decomposition technique, you ought to be using behavioral driven development. It's much more effective. Um, but there are other things seriously wrong with it, and I'll show you how to expand on it with this case study. And uh, and then I want to do questions at the end. And this first session, because it's of the nature of it, the timing will be a little different. I asked Thomas to be my timer on this. Uh, so what I will probably do is do 10 minutes intro, which I normally won't do, so that doesn't count against the case study, then 40 minutes of case study, and then 10 minutes Q&A on other things. In the future, the format of these sessions will be one of two things. The first 40 minutes will either be if one of you has a project or case study or help you want, if you give me advance notice, it's got to be the week before. We can actually take on your problem like we do in Amplio University and actually discuss it for 40 minutes. Okay, I think that's a great way to learn. You've got to give me a heads up. Always after today's session, the last 20 minutes will be Q&A of what we're doing. And if nobody has questions, the session will end at that point. Okay, so that's just hopefully encourage you to do it. This session, I'm adding 10 minutes to the front, keeping my 40 minutes for the case study that I'm presenting, and then 10 minutes Q&A at the end because you may not be prepared. So let me show you what I'm doing here and give a quick explanation. A lot of you are aces who are here, so you've heard this, so I'll try to keep it short. But basically, what we had was I was working on, uh, well, it might just be easier to find it here. Just by looking it up on the what I had been using is the book Being an Effective Value Coach, which is a book co-written by myself and Paula Stewart. And it was a lot more, it was coaching, but there was also a lot of other stuff in it that was of generic knowledge. But about two-thirds of this book, and I was putting it online, and I will not continue doing this, and I'll show you why. About two-thirds of this book is actually about coaching. Some of it is more about consulting, going into things, but I was intentionally keeping this out of the Amplio particular. I was thinking, well, we want a good coaching book, and if I mention Amplio, people won't read it as much. But since then, I have decided, well, I'm just going to tell things the way I think they should be done and not try to fit into the mess I think we have in the Agile space now. And perhaps more important, I am a big believer that you cannot do teach concepts and teach how to convey those concepts separately. There are all these people who know things, but they don't know how to explain them to other people, which means, first of all, they don't really know them that well. And second of all, it doesn't do that much use because nobody works individually anymore. Okay. Or almost nobody. I shouldn't say nobody. So, what I've decided to do, and this is a link I'll leave when I write this. I'll leave this link. I can put it in the chat now. Uh, but I will add this to the session when I put it on YouTube. Uh, but what I've decided to do is first of all talk about, and we have to come up with a better name, technology gap. It's not really technology, but it's like the gap from what's happening to what can be done. And this guy who coined the concept called it technology gap. We need a new term. But there are a lot of things I think wrong. We're not doing well. We're misrepresenting. Amplio, one of the things I've talked about Amplio, it's got to be the system and how to apply it, how to coach and consult, and a support system. Okay. Now, I'm not going to be doing the support system online. I'm not going to add it to this, but I might put references to it. I'll probably do that, like pictures and things like that, but not to the actual thing. But what I'm doing is when I say this, if you need to coach, then I want to write a book, and I've already got it two-thirds written because it's from the Amplio Dev book that is out there, but I don't talk about too much on the coaching book. and I'm integrating it all here. Now, right now, I'm not so great about the integration, but I would suggest starting to look at this and read what's of interest. So I start with, the core concepts. This stuff's out there in videos as well. I don't have all the links crossing, but I'll add that. I'm putting in coaching. So a lot of the things, if you had been reading the coaching book, you'll find they come from here. I've actually added some things and I'm seeing better ways of explaining things. Um, some of these, and I'm going to start adding dates when I add them. So if you want to, hey, did I read this? I don't know. Just remember the last date you read through. Um, and then I go into what Amplio is, product management, things like that. Now, I'm not going to do this today, but I highly recommend reading Amplio as a framework of capabilities and patterns. And Amplio is not a framework of practices and values like most every other framework is. And it's a little different than disciplined agile, and it goes beyond the DA idea of choose your way of working by providing you a structure within which to do it. And then I'm starting to put the case studies. These have all been published. So, like I say, a lot of this. Now, this one is the one we're going to go through in detail in just a few minutes. Okay. Uh, so what this one, and I'm not going to show it as a case study. I'm going to walk you through it as we did it. Okay. And see how we talked about it. Okay. And then I'm going to talk about part of that will be, let's see. So this is the case study. Um, this is, I was going to talk about jobs to be done. Yeah. Why you can't create great products by giving customers what they ask for. So this is something I've known for a long time. And when I built products, yes, I talked to customers, but that's not where I came up what to do. What I came up what to do is I did value stream analysis. I've been doing value stream analysis since the 80s because that's when I learned it. I got very fortunate. I picked good coaches, I suppose, good mentors. This guy was teaching lean. They didn't even have a word for lean. He was teaching us Toyota and Deming back in the 80s. Uh, Jobs to be Done is a brilliant book. He talks about you look at what jobs need to happen and you design from that. And I totally agree. I look at it by value stream analysis. So in that sense, he calls it jobs to be done. I call it value stream analysis, but that part's quite similar. And he talks, I do recommend this book. You can even get a PDF for free. I'll find where that link is. I got the PDF and then I bought the book because I like to take notes. And I know you can't read that fast, but here, he talks about the one approach is ideas first and explains why that doesn't work. And he talks about, uh, that just gets you test fast, fail fast, adjust fast. This doesn't work. I've been saying this for a long time. Um, you know, and he gives the reasons here. And then the needs first. He explains why that doesn't work. People don't really understand what's going on, and this bottom-up approach we do is not a good thing. Okay. So that's a reference, but now I'm going to just show you how we did it. Oh, and he has a lot of good strategy stuff in here, marketing and all that. Okay, so I'm on schedule because now I'm going to start my 40-minute part here. Okay, any questions? I got another minute. Any questions about the structure? Still meeting Tuesdays, 8 a.m. Pacific. The format from this point is if you have something you want to work as a real case study, let me know the week before. And if I agree to it, we'll do that. Otherwise, I'll do what I call project work. One of the things we're doing in Amplio that's cool is we're actually building Amplio as we learn Amplio. We're extending it. We're adding to support. And there's some project work I will probably do here that we can work on simultaneously, such as maybe making it better how to pick practices, things like that. So it'll be a hands-on learning experience by doing and creating. See, it's one thing to learn by doing, it's another thing to learn by creating. Okay, any questions though on what I've said in the new format? Same time, different structure. Okay. So I'm going to go through this case study, and I got to tell you the situation so you understand what happened. This is back in 1995. I haven't changed the names to protect the innocent because this is what actually happened. Okay. Uh, so there was this Edwin, actually, but I'm just calling him Ed here. CEO and owner, president of Neil Corporation, except there are two L's here. They were a distributor of hair salon products and majority stakeholder of Easy Touch Systems. Okay. They were located in Hammond, Louisiana, and I formed a partnership with them called Easy Touch Systems. This was a system that could use touch screens. It was for hair salons. People didn't know computers, so being very easy to use was important. This is me. I was president and CTO of Easy Touch Systems. I was actually also the CIO of Neil Corp because I knew more about software than anybody else. So they gave me that second job, and I couldn't say no because Ed was basically 60% stake. He owned more of Easy Touch than I did. Okay. There were salon owners. These are our critical stakeholders, those using Easy Touch. Okay. So when I say Easy Touch, I mean the application. Easy Touch Systems was the name of the company. This was a full-fledged hair salon business, except it could do more than hair. It could do day spas, everything. Uh, we formed this partnership because I had already written this software and it was recognized as the easiest to use, the most powerful, quick to learn. Now, that's another story how I designed it. The training to people who had never touched a computer before was between 15 and 30 minutes. That's a story in and of itself. And the reason was that I designed it the way they worked. So they didn't have to learn a new way of working. They didn't have to learn the system. It worked just the way they wanted it to work. But that's again a different story. I'm talking about something else. Okay. Now you'll notice I'm not talking about users. I'm talking about stakeholders. Many of these stakeholders aren't users of the system. This is the first thing to recognize. And I've said this many, many times, but it just needs to be brought to our attention. We don't think and talk about what we see. We see what we are able to think and talk about. And when you think and talk about users, when you say user stories, what are user stories about? Well, obviously, they're about users. You don't think about stakeholders. Then you go, oh, yeah, well, users are stakeholders. Well, users are a kind of stakeholders. What about all the other stakeholders? What about the stakeholders that aren't users? What about some like security? What about if there's some system I've got to connect to? They're not using the system, but I got to interact with them. Users, there are users who are not stakeholders, but stakeholders is what we're interested in getting value. So there were some other stakeholders here. Some of them were salon owners not using Easy Touch because we wanted to be able to sell the system to them. Salon managers of salons, a salon manager of a salon using Easy Touch, stylists in salons using Easy Touch. Okay. Support people for Easy Touch or stakeholders. They didn't use the system. Does that make sense? Shouldn't I be, when we're building software, shouldn't we be paying attention to this? Notice how users doesn't have you see all these things. Secondary stakeholders, the clients of the salon. In other words, they're not involved in the system at all directly. They're definitely not users of the system, but they're stakeholders of the system. So I come from value first. Value first means identify your critical stakeholders. Identify critical stakeholders. I've been talking about this for a bit. You'll notice I put them up here because we're the ones who are going to be deciding what really to do. And then these are other people we have to pay attention to. Their values, their success criteria, and their constraints. Reality, by the way, is also a critical stakeholder. I'd really like to go to Mars in 10 minutes. Reality tells me, nope, not possible. Okay, so let's look at that. What are the values of these stakeholders? Well, Ed, he wanted profitability by increased sales of products. Remember, there's a hair salon product distributor that bought my product and me, basically. Okay. My values were do what basically Ed asked me to do. I'll be honest. Ed, you said jump. How high, Ed? Why? Because my salary was dependent upon him liking me being in the company. He could fire me at any time. I'd get a little bit. I had a clause, what happens if I get fired, but it certainly was not possible. It was not a good thing for me. And to be candid, I was in a financial bind at the time. So he had control over me. So that's why I put that one first, because that was true. But I wanted to improve the quality of the Easy Touch systems, and I wanted to improve, I mean, the quality of Easy Touch, the software, and I wanted to improve the profitability of Easy Touch systems because also that's what Ed wanted, but I'd make more money. So these were our values. Salon owners wanted to be profitable. They wanted quality care to their clients. And they wanted ease of management. These people were very often, the salon owner was very often a stylist, not always, but very often a stylist. And they were very busy. The way a lot of salons start is you have some really, really good stylist who works for somebody else for a while, and then they decide, I'm going to go on my own because I'm tired of them taking 50% of my income. Okay. And then they discover all of a sudden it wasn't necessarily a bad idea. But there's a lot of ego involved in the salon business. Okay. I was very heavily involved in the salon business for a decade. Okay. In fact, I've impacted the salon business with what I've done in 2 or 3 ways. My name's not on it, but that's another story. This is one of the ways. This is again back in the 90s. High-end salons, for the most part, did not sell product very well. One big exception was Aveda. We were partners with Aveda, by the way. They bought their stuff from us, at least in our region. We were in the Southeast region. And Aveda was ahead of the game, and they were doing it without the tool. That's just what they were. And I worked closely with those guys as well, but that's another story. This did not come from Aveda. Salon manager. So a salon manager, we're not talking about these, like hair clips or, great clips or something like that. We were talking about a high end, the best really in the country salons. In fact, one of our clients was the company that came up with the idea of the day spa, the Noel Day Spa in Stamford, Connecticut. I mean, they didn't always exist. There were hair salons and there were spas. And Noel DiCaprio, she got this idea, and Peter DiCaprio, her husband, they manifested it and created it. So we had like a lot of high end, like I said, Aveda for that. So they didn't have a lot of time though. So they went from this low end of I'm a hairstylist myself who owns a place, and I brought in a lot of people, but they were interested in being profitable, quality, ease of management. The salon manager was the person at the front desk. Virtually every one of these had a person dedicated to the front desk. It was not a stylist who came to the front desk when you walked in. They were interested in the efficiency, the effort put into it, and the profitability, because that would ensure their job. Okay. Stylists, they were quality of services to customers' income, and they did not want to be salespeople. They did not want to sell product. That was not their interest. This was palpable. You just had to talk to them, and you knew this. I'm an artiste. I'm not a salesperson. Don't tell me to sell shit. That's not my job. That's not who I am. You're telling me to violate my values. I'm not kidding. This was how it was. What did clients want? They want a great looking hair. Real simple. And to stay great looking. See, the problem with a lot of places is you go in, you look great when you come out, and then 2 days later, it goes back to the way it looked like before you went in. Now, that might be a good way to resell your services, except people aren't that stupid, and they'll find some place where you come back and where you look good after a while. Okay. So this is pretty clear. I want to be clear about this. Notice where I'm starting. I'm not starting with stories and figuring this thing out. I'm starting with the values of the stakeholders. And the values of the stakeholders, if you know your stakeholders, are not hard to find. You just talk to them. You see how they operate. You see what decisions they're making. You look at their value streams. You see what they like and what they dislike by how they work and what they complain about and what they wish for. This is not asking them for what they need. Not that I won't ask them for what they need, because sometimes they have good ideas, but mostly they don't. And here's why they don't. Look, most agilists aren't very good with systems thinking or value stream analysis. How the hell do you expect your customers to be good at it? I mean, seriously. What is the value add as a product developer you give? One of the things is you should know more about how to run things than they do. Believe it or not, at one time, I'm not saying now, definitely not now, but for about a year, I knew more about running a hair salon than probably anybody else in the business. Now, why was that? A lot of it was because of Ed. He had this idea that effective, efficient salons would sell more product, would be better, would be more efficient. We had studied Deming. We put in inventory turns. We talked to them. We actually ran a school for hair salons. Guess who was the IT coach in the school? Me. I'd come in, I'd get a half a day, and I talk to them about inventory turns and how you use software. This is in the 90s, by the way. This is when a lot of people didn't have computers like this. Why were we doing all that? Because we weren't looking at a thin product, we were looking at the entire organization. Okay, so we'd been doing this for about 6 months. We'd identified, I don't know how many customers we had at this time, probably about 30 or 40 at that time. We got a lot more later, but we were looking at what were some common values of critical stakeholders. Okay, it should be clear it was profitability, right? I'm talking about the critical stakeholders. We all wanted to be profitable. I did, Ed did, the salon owners did. What missing opportunities there were for critical stakeholders. Now, here you need to know something about the business. You may or may not know this. Hair salon products, at least at the time, if a salon sold it for $40, they were paying us $20. That was pretty much a 50% margin from the wholesaler to the retail. It was about 100% markup. Some things were more like 80% markup, 50% markup, but more or less, if they sold $100 of product, they got $50 in profit. Okay, less breakage and shit like that. But there's actually not a lot of breakage or theft in hair salons. At least back then, there didn't seem to be a big problem because everything's out in the open and a lot of people are looking, and you're kind of silly to shoplift when everybody can see you. So that wasn't the big issue. So we knew that salons could sell more products than the salon owners thought they could. The average sales was about 4%. How did we know this? Because he knew what, even if they weren't using our system, if they were using our system, we had the detail of everything. But in the university and just through his gathering, he knew about what salons sold from retail and services. When I say 4%, I mean, if they did $100 in services, they did $4 on average of retail, which meant Ed was making $2 for every $100 of retail of salon services. We knew it should be in the range of 15 to 20%. How did we know that? Because places like Aveda were doing that. Why were they doing that? Well, Aveda had a culture of helping their clients and talking about the products. If you go into an Aveda salon, you'll see this. Now, a lot of people have copied Aveda, so it's not as distinguishable now as it was back in the 90s. Aveda's had a huge impact on the hair salon business, by the way. They had also, I forgot his last name, but Horst was the owner of Aveda. He was a very interesting guy. He was very passionate about hair quality and health. He tied the two together. That's why there's a lot of stuff in Aveda that has nothing to do with hair. What was the impediment to sales? Is it clear this is a missing opportunity? This would represent like a 10% increase in sales to the salon, a 5% increase in their net profit, and a 2.5% increase to Ed for every salon that worked with him that had the system. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? This was our motivations. So far, this looks pretty logical. See, we looked at who are our stakeholders. Here's the process. Who are our stakeholders? What do they value? What were some of the common values so we could build something that made sense? What was the impediment to getting that? What was the missed opportunity? What was the impediment? So how could we remove the impediment? What was the impediment? The impediment were the stylists. Now, if you don't know a stylist personally, I knew a lot of them. One thing about them is they're very, what's the word, individualistic. is the way to say it. They take pride in what they do. See, they're very concerned about their clients, but telling them what to do isn't going to work. Remember their values was quality of services. This is what I wrote up above. Income, and they did not want to be sold. This was their value. Now, this is something that irritates me a lot in the industry. People talk about values and this and that, and they don't tell you what you do when people don't meet your values. You do not change people's values quickly, if at all. It usually takes a catastrophic event to change people's values. People hit rock bottom as an addict, they might change their values from addiction, or same with criminals that have done something. Or if you've had a business and you ran it into the ground, you might decide to think later about what caused that to happen and you change your values. But we were not going to change their values. They didn't want to be salespeople. They didn't want to be salespeople. That wasn't going to change. What do you think is possible then to change? Let's think about it for a minute while I have a sip of coffee.
Maybe the incentives.
I'm sorry, what?
Maybe the incentives they could be changed.
The incentives could be changed. You could pay them more. So, because they did get a revenue from sales. So, yes, if you paid them more to sell, but the problem was now you have a conflict here. Now you're overcoming this value by adding more to that. Do you see the conflict?
Yes.
So, Carlos, that's a good idea, but notice we have a conflict. So when you have conflicting values, you don't go as good as when you resolve the value.
Maybe the incentive could not be necessarily money. Maybe the incentive
Okay.
could be something else.
What would the other incentive be? Thanks for the dialogue. What would the other incentive be?
Maybe brand recognition. Maybe these artists they have their own, social media and stuff like that. Maybe they can use
Good
the
idea. I didn't even
environment.
think about that. But remember, back in the 90s, there wasn't social media. But no,
Yeah.
Carlos, that's a really good idea. That's a really good thing. And then maybe they will, okay, well, I don't really like selling, but I like the brand, so I'm going to sell to get the brand. Yeah. Tony,
I've just the what's in it for me phrase just kind of went through
what's in
my
it
brain.
for me?
What's in it for me?
Okay. Now, what's in it for me again
You,
could
you
still
appeal to
be,
that. You appeal to that.
you could appeal to that, but can you appeal to it without causing conflict?
I'm thinking pique their curiosity.
Pique their curiosity. Okay, now can you imagine? So this is all good thinking, but piquing their curiosity and then getting them involved and enrolling, doesn't that sound like a long time?
Hmm, could be.
Okay, so one of Ellie Goldratt's thing, theory of constraints, he talks a lot about this and it's not luck. And it's not luck, he talks about the evaporating cloud and how you can resolve conflicts. See, they don't want to be salespeople, but they want to increase the quality of services to their customer. Is there a way of increasing the quality of services to customers by offering products without being a salesperson in the way salespeople are thought of? What are salespeople? Are they coming from your interest or are they trying to sell something? See, here's the thing. Here's what we realize. They don't want to be salespeople, but they do want to offer quality services and products. Do you see the difference? We're not telling them you've got to sell this. That won't work. It might, like what Carlos was saying, give them incentive, give them more money. Maybe they want a brand. But if we can, what we don't want them to sell anyway, what we want them to do is offer the right products to the people so their pair can do better. Does that fit this value here? Does that go against this value here? No. In other words, you have to position it properly. We're not changing their values. It's like you say, Tony, what's in it for me in a sense? That what's in it for me is to do this while not doing this because I'm making them happier. I'm giving them better hair. Now, for haircuts, this isn't that important. I use a little product. I just kind of spray it to keep it back like that. But if you're doing a perm or if you're getting color, yeah, you have no problem at all, Tony. Uh,
I had to do that.
you are you are the stylist's worst enemy. Anyway, so what we look at is we remove the impediment not by changing their values, but by showing them coming up with a solution that fits their values reframed. Now, here's something that I didn't mention yet. How did Ed know about me? This is interesting. Remember, I told you I learned systems thinking and value stream analysis. There's a fellow named Marshall Thurber who taught me that in the 84, 85, 86 region, like 10 years before this. That's when I learned Deming. That's when I learned Lean, although it wasn't called Lean. We studied Toyota. There's a lot of stuff interesting that was going on that you could find out about Toyota very easily. I learned that all back in the 80s. Marshall was a business consultant and he consulted with Ed. And then Ed got the idea we need to build a software system that does all this, and Marshall put me together with Ed, and we formed the company Easy Touch because I already had a company called Basic Touch that had the whole salon package working. So we wanted to shift the stylist attitude, not their values. You get there's a difference between attitude and values. Attitude can be shifted, values can't be shifted. And we knew systems thinking. So one of the key things about systems thinking is you can use systems to create the behavior you want. See, we always complain about it. We're in a bad culture. We've got a bad system. It's working against us. Well, the reverse is true. If you create the right system, you can get the right behavior. And people who say you can't do this just don't know how, because I've done it and I've seen a lot of other people do it. So how could selling products means you're a salesperson shift to selling products mean you're serving your client? See, this was the question. Does that make sense? This is the question we got to. It was just a natural progression, actually. I remember figuring this out in a couple hours because we're coming from values. What does the product enable clients to do? Better hair quality, especially when perms and color services have been done. This is basic knowledge. By the way, if I had a development company and there were just a bunch of developers in the back room, would they be able to do any of this analysis whatsoever? No. Does putting a product owner between them and the client help? No. So how could we enable this? Well, it was really clear because we knew how things done. Actually, this was one of the other ways I did influence the industry. Back before I worked with Ed, in a couple of years before that, I worked with a company called Renbo International. Renato Brunis was the owner. He was considered pretty much one of the top hair chemists in the world. Okay, he knew how to do hair color. He knew how to do perms. And a friend of mine who knew him, actually my stylist who knew him, put us together because at the time stylists were almost afraid to do hair color where it lightened it because sometimes your hair, when you took somebody who's like a brunette or dark hair and made them a blonde, sometimes it wouldn't go right if you lifted the color too much and their hair would come out purple. Now that's a desirable look, but back in the 90s, it was a mistake. Okay, seems pink and purple, that's cool. But you didn't want it to happen by accident, is the point. So I actually knew hair. I'd known the hair salon business since actually in the 80s. It was one of the first products I built in my company back then. I knew, knowing what people had done, that if somebody comes in and they had a perm 2 months ago, you can offer them better products. If you knew a month ago they had their hair colored, because you've done it, but you don't remember everybody. So this idea of providing a history of services was just something you knew because you knew the industry. Does that make sense? Can you see how a salon stylist would understand what to do? They would know not to waste time trying to sell Tony products when he's getting his nails done or something. Okay, so the question then becomes, what would a minimum valuable increment be? This is my term, or it was net objectives and a term, but I've extended it quite a bit since the net objectives days. That is like a product, something we could release that is usable, self-contained. So it's got, just to put it in here to know what it is, usable, fully kitted. Fully kitted means all the things needed to support it are part of it. This is a TOC theory constraints concept, supportable. So we thought, well, what if we had a report that would provide each stylist in the salon a detail of services and products for each client they were seeing? Okay, so now here's where it gets interesting. Or it's been interesting. Here's what gets even more interesting. How do you want this report to be, is the question. Well, you obviously need to know how the stylists work, don't you? Remember, let's go back to these stakeholders. You need to know how is this report going to affect management? How's it going to affect the stylists? How's it going to affect the support people? See, I could just, you push a button and you get everything printed out, everybody coming in. See, if I just give this, print a report of all this, can you see how a developer might just get who's coming in today and they just print out the report alphabetically or by the days they come in? That doesn't make any sense, does it? Then what does the salon manager have to do? They've got to sort them because you want to give only the clients of a stylist to the stylist. What if somebody's going to two stylists? Then you need to print it twice. But you won't know this from the description. You won't know that from this. You can only know how they use it if you look at how they are working. That's called value stream analysis or jobs to be done. Right? He would talk about how do they work. Look at the steps. Okay. Actually, I guess I don't need this, but I'm just referring back to that book. So what we looked at was, well, we need to print the report out in the order the clients were coming. And I should say for each stylist. I missed that when I wrote it up, but we realized that. In other words, and that means that if somebody's coming into two stylists, each stylist gets it. Now, by the way, this just added something as I'm talking to you, as we have this conversation. It also means we need to include all services done today. Because you don't want everybody bugging them, maybe. That's easy to do. Have the reports be automatically printed during the overnight procedure. In other systems, what they did is the manager had to come in early. They printed out all the reports in the morning. What I did is at the end of the day, I had an overnight procedure that printed out things. Why? Because I knew how managers work. Why make them wait 30 minutes in the morning? Yes, the paper could jam, but most of the time it didn't have a problem. So you notice that key was already done. Why did I have an overnight procedure is the point? Because I knew that made their job easier. Why? Because I knew how salons ran. By the way, when I was doing this, when I hired somebody into Easy Touch, their first 2 weeks were at a spa that my partner owned. They worked the front desk with a supervision, of course. Because how could you write software for somebody if you don't understand what their work is? Let me say that again. How can you possibly write software for people when you don't understand how they get their job done? Oh, it's very common. It's easy to do. It's just crappy software. That's why you need UX experts now. If an appointment book is booked for the day, automatically print the report for that client. In other words, if somebody books an appointment, I'm coming in later, it's not in the report in the morning. So you got to reprint it. Or not reprint it, you got to print it. Add an option to ask if this should be automatic. I always felt it should be, but sometimes they say, no, that's all right, we'll do it by hand. Be able to print a report for a single client. If they walk in, that's different than if they book an appointment. Some places do walk-ins. And prepare a training document. Because if you can't train people in using this, it's not going to do you any good. Does this make sense? Can you see how we knew to do this from the earlier conversations? This was not a difficult task. Yeah, there were a couple of minor modifications, like I did forget. Well, these were obvious too, but I don't remember when we realized we need to put all services done today in case there were duplicates, that might be useful, but whatever. Yeah, Thomas.
Just a quick time check. You have 10 minutes left for the
Yeah,
40 minutes.
thanks. I'm aware, but I appreciate it. I'm getting there. So this is the format I like instead of user story comment format. For a stakeholder, we want this functionality, which enables this in order to get this value. This is different. This is different than this. See, in the user story, actually, everything about the way a user story is done, in my opinion, is wrong. Now let's just look at that. This is this post. As a who, I want. So first of all, it's like this is written as if they can tell us what they want when we know that's not true. Notice the word value is not here. It's inferred. But if we're not thinking and talking about it, we won't see it and we will forget it. See, they leave out where they originated. They didn't come from the user most of the time. Who they're for, it may not be for the user. The value to be received and the implication that that these are independent. They are cohesive. They can be done on their own, but they're not really independent. So let's come back here. So I only wrote two of them, but you get the idea. So I said, for stylist, we want to print out a report detailing the services and products provided to a client, which enables the stylist. In this case, see, sometimes the stakeholder and is not affecting directly the user. The person is who the stakeholder is, but in this case it does, which enables them to understand the interests and past services of their clients in order to provide advice for products and sell more products, I should say products. For the salon manager, we want to print out the client services report overnight, which enables easily putting the reports on the stylist chairs in order to lower costs. Does this make sense? Now, I haven't written them. I'm going to leave this as an exercise. We could write these in this form. But let me be careful here. The form is not important. In fact, I don't like the form. I don't like any form. I like the intention of the form. The intention of the form is who it is for, what we want to do as the creators of that, which enables some outcomes to get value. The problem is we want which enables in order. As you start writing these, you'll see that this should be written a little differently. But stakeholder, who, what's wanted, what enables, and value absolutely has got to be there. Does that make sense?
Seems
Okay.
like the intention comes from with like maybe curiosity and maybe clarity, right? The essence of what we're trying to kind of get out of it, right? It's
Yeah,
coming from a place of curiosity, a place of clarity. Maybe a clarity to ourselves, but then also for them as well.
yeah. I like your comment there, Carlos, because what this is telling us is what to look at. So we see it. The format is there to remind us of what to look at, but the exact words don't matter. So it provides clarity of what to look at, and the structure of writing it is a little less important, but that's correct. Okay, so what were the results of this? The results of this were within a week, two at the most, of the salons, their retail on average sales went from 4% to 13%. That was 4.5% bottom line for these salons. Now, how much work did it take? Well, we actually had to train 3 different stakeholders. The training of the manager was really easy. He said, look, these are going to come out at the end of the day. Just they're already in the right order. Just collate them and collate them. They've got to collate them. Have you ever tried collating something where every page looks the same? You got to look at every damn thing. So this is something I remember we added. So at first we just printed it out. And then I realized every time the stylus changed, print out a blank page, or not a blank page, a page with a stylus name filling the page. So you could just shuffle, oh, here's this stylus. Oh, here's this stylus. Oh, here's this stylus. Okay. So you can refine things. But basically, if all you got to do is tell them, set it up on the overnight, in the morning, put the things on the chair for the stylus. This was like 15 minutes of training. It's not a big deal. What did we do with the manager? Not the manager, it was the manager. What did we do with the salon owner? Well, we told them why we thought this would work. And they thought, yeah, why? Because they could understand how it was going to work because they understood their business. What we did to the stylist, and we explained to the manager, this is maybe another 15 minutes to the two. I forget. I think we let them decide who to talk to the stylist, but we explained to them about why we were interested in the retail. We weren't going to lie. They did get a cut, but we wanted them to look at what they were more concerned with, helping their clients. Or just, we didn't even talk about it as a conflict. We just said, look, you want to help your clients, this will get your clients. If you don't think the product is the right thing for them, then don't make the recommendation. There's no pressure here. We told them to tell them that. Why? Why would pressure do any good? It would just, if we pressured them, it would just evoke this thing. So we didn't. We just stressed this. And that's why it worked. Okay, so questions about this. I've got 3 minutes here and I'm actually done. I write up a summary of this because I said a variety of things that were very important, about user stories being wrong, where you come from. Notice you don't start. Oh, that was the thing I did want to mention. See, I say there are 4 things wrong with user stories. I mentioned there's a 5th. This is the biggest one. And I see this rampant. Oh, well, this isn't really what's wrong. This is just I don't like invest because they're not independent. You notice I have to write them in a certain order as I implement them, plus they all work together, but that's not the big problem. The big problem is if you're writing what to do from user stories, we could not figure this whole thing out from the stories. Notice how coming from the value proposition enabled us to write the stories. In other words, we didn't figure out the value proposition from the stories. We wrote the stories based on the value proposition. You get that backwards, you really mess things up. Most Agile has it backwards. And then you have all these side people making sure the devs are doing the wrong thing in a better way. Okay. Questions? 2 minutes. 1 minute. Or is this clear enough? By the way, this was not a one-off. I did this for over a decade, stuff like this. Actually, more than that. Okay, I'm just gonna let you think.
Was there anything that made the stylists feel less like salespeople based on the report that they had of what the customers previously
As we
bought?
said, you're not selling product, you're telling them how they can make their hair better. What do they need to make their hair better?
Hmm.
So if you got a perm, there are certain treatments you need to put on. If you want your hair to look better, just tell them, be an advisor. So the shift was from being a salesperson to an advisor.
And they didn't do that before without the report?
A lot of them didn't. No. Not in these smaller places. They did it at Aveda. They didn't in other places. Yeah, Susan.
Oh, I think one of the things you mentioned when you described this situation earlier is that isn't one of the things in the report what they had bought in the past, and they could tell them what they needed to buy so they wouldn't run out?
Yeah, that was another advantage of it. That's why you had what we said.
That's not something that would be easy to carry in your head, but if you had a report, oh,
That's
you're going
right.
to be really low on this product.
Yeah. That's right. So we had that. Also, a new product might have come out that's better than what we had. And then you could use it for that. You also had a place to put notes in about the client that they would get every time. That was an add-on that we added later. Oh, so the stylist would write on the sheet new stuff about the client. They'd give it back to the manager and they get in the system that way. So you had a way to track notes with this. You see how we could just build on this. We did just build on this. Yeah, it was underscoring their commitment to the client. And a lot of them just felt like, oh, I don't want to be a salesperson, so they wouldn't think about it. Instead of I want to be an advisor. Thomas, that's your point. The conversation became I want to be an advisor, not I want to be a salesperson. And not everybody was negative, but a lot were. Okay. So I'm through with the presentation. I can keep talking about this if you ask me questions, or you can ask me questions about just anything you have, anything I've written in in this new. You could also ask a question about this new format if you want to that I talked about.
Yeah, maybe more a comment than a question. So I
Yeah,
also
whatever you want. I'm just not presenting anymore.
I
Comments,
put that in the
questions, again,
chat
welcome.
about Tom Gilb's stakeholder engineering and the 10
Yeah,
principles
yeah.
and two important parts that no matter how many stakeholders we have, or we think it's a complete list, there's a good chance, like Al Shalloway's law, right, that there's one more stakeholder that you have missed. And even for those stakeholder requirements that you have gathered, um, there's a good chance that an existing stakeholder has yet other requirements that were missed initially. So this is a kind of a dynamic exercise, and one should not assume that at any point one has 100% complete picture. And the other thing that I would mention is your presentation made it sound like coming from the users might be sort of the wrong end. And I would qualify that somewhat and say coming only from the users is not,
Yes,
but the users are just in most cases they are stakeholders. They
that's
may
right.
not be the most important ones, but so don't just focus exclusively on users, but keep all the other
Okay.
stakeholders in mind.
Thanks. I had thought I had said that, but I didn't make it clear, obviously, because you didn't hear me. So, because some of these are users and some of them aren't, but the critical stakeholders are often not users.
Yeah.
But that's right. That's right. We're going, but see, here's the point, Thomas. If you focus on users only, that's what I really meant. Don't focus only on users because then you don't think and talk about the other stakeholders. But if you talk about stakeholders, then users will be included. And while you were talking, I realized, see, a secondary stakeholder is somebody who's not using the system. But it occurred to me, clients of the salon and significant others. My wife has this awesome, somewhat expensive hairstylist. Well, I'm a secondary stakeholder because if she didn't look good after coming from him, I wouldn't be wanting to pay for his services. Fact is, he's the best I've ever seen her have. I love her hair. So that's just an example of what you just said, Thomas. It just you keep noticing them. But notice what I'm also doing is I've got them in kind of a sequence. In fact, I'll tell you what I'll do next week. I'm going to continue this theme. There's something in Joy Inc. by Richard Sheridan where they talk about how do you resolve the issues between multiple stakeholders. So I'll make sure I write that up. I've talked about that in the MVI template, but it might be a nice little separate unit. Questions about anything? Or comments? Or qualms?
I can
Keep qualm
see
and
I can see
carry on.
this I can see this use case being um, consider for, like, for example, when you end up kind of having like maybe the ask of an engineer wanting to do project management type of work, right? It's like, hey, I am an engineer, I'm not a project manager, and why not? So something similar can be, you know addressed with what you're discussing here.
Yeah, the thing I that I was doing mentally as we went through it, but I need to write it up, is what is the process we followed here? We came from our identifying our critical stakeholders, what their values were, what's their way of working using job value stream analysis. Then how did we decide what the actions, the stories were, and their stakeholder stories? And then what order would we put them in? And then how would we build them simply? And not all these were in the MVI. In fact, but actually I think maybe all these were, then a couple of the other options, like being able to put on notes was not a part of the MVI. Notice we could release all this, but notice we couldn't release this. We couldn't release it without this. This is part of the full kitting. If you didn't have them trained, it wouldn't do any good to have the function in there. It's called shelfware. Okay. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm pause and not talk. I tend to jump into silence, but I shouldn't. Questions, comments, qualms. I'm looking for something while you're thinking.
Well, I think one thing to point out is that your focus was on what was needed rather than how you were going to do it technologically.
That's right.
Because that's the big thing that a lot of technologists jump to. We can do this as opposed to what it is that we are doing, whether we use this or that or the other thing.
Yeah, and this is one of the problems with the Agile Manifesto. It has us look at developing software instead of creating value. It's misguided in that direction. Now, there is a lot of value in the manifesto, but it's not complete. And I think it misdirects us. There's the key qualm. Susan was the first person to say it, and that's why. And the reason I say this is like, this is how I want y'all to be too. You might have a serious objection. Great, talk to me. You might have a concern, talk to me. But you might just have an uneasy feeling, a qualm. Then you should talk to me. Ask, hey, I'm a little uncomfortable. Okay, 2 minutes to go.
Yeah, just emphasizing what Susan said, that the shift from specific features or behaviors to outcomes and to what you want the service or the product to effect and what kind of outcome and impact it should have. That's why I like the stakeholder formula or template better than a user story, which is typically more centered towards an activity, how you interact and what you do, not what you try to have as an outcome.
Exactly. I just had a very interesting realization out of your all's interaction with me. We know that one of the bad things about waterfall is it sets up silos. It sets up, you do all of this, then all of this, then all of this, then all of this. But the other thing it does is it's siloed responsibilities. Developers are about developing. And we might break the silos down. We might break the phase gates down, but developers are still about developing. Their job is adding value. In fact, that's one of the first conversations I have when I go, and your job is not writing code. Your job is not building software. Your job is adding value to the customer. That's a big shift. That's what y'all have been saying. Okay. Yeah. Frederick.
The goal with the use case was to have a conversant with the users from beginning, not to make the requirements.
That's right.
So, yeah, that's right. So that was a nice way to write in yours way. It was very interesting.
Yeah, be clear that when we had these conversations, Ed, myself, the other couple of people who are in this, we were experts. We had been talking to users for him thousands of, actually me thousands of hours too. I was already in the business for about 10 years. Yeah, I was in the business about eight or 9 years. So we'd already been talking to them for years. We were now looking at the next thing. I built Easy Touch on the basis of talking to customers. I looked at their basic needs. That's what we called it, basic touch. Before I was bought, we called it basic touch. So it was like the basic needs, and it was touch, and that's where the name came from. So yeah, I need to make that more clear. You need to understand the customer, and anything that separates you from that is a problem. I will throw in one anecdote. I don't know if I've written this up, but I will definitely write it up. So I told you how when I hired a new person into Easy Touch, the first 2 weeks, they had to work in the hair salon. My partner owned the hair salon as a test case. So that's how we knew this too. We tested everything on our own salon before we put it out in the field. He literally owned the salon. So we could do that. Well, when I became CIO of his IT department, I made everybody spend a day talking to customers. We spent about each department, I think it was 2 days actually. We had each department in the company come through and talk to all of us for an hour about what they wanted and needed and what their problems were. And the idea was mostly to create a rapport. And it made a huge impact on the people in the company. And it was absolutely hated. I was hated by the IT department for making them do that. I was a very unpopular IT director. And this was also in the 90s when I wasn't nearly as sensitive and nice and always thinking properly as I am today. Well, I didn't think I'd get that out with a straight face. Okay. So anyway, we're going to meet next week. I will figure out what it is. Again, if any of you have a serious problem and you want to talk about it, just know it's public. We can do that. You just have to let me know in a couple of days. Like by when tomorrow, end of day tomorrow would be good. Maybe Thursday. Okay, take care. I'll be getting this up on YouTube with notes on some of the things I referred to. Thanks for your questions.
Do you have any hair products to
Thank you.
recommend?
Actually, no, not anymore. I used to know all that stuff and I don't. Oh, and Thomas, you're right. It shifted. It's not the way it is now. It has shifted. This is one of the places. It wasn't so much me, but this is what Edwin and Aveda did, and they were a client of ours. People saw that you could, in fact, create more retail and more profit with retail, and he led the way. And he led the way due to systems thinking and a tool that would support it. And this is why when people discount tools, I get irritated, because this would not have happened without the support system. And it was so easy with a support system.
So next time I go to Sports Clips and they ask me at the end whether I need any more product, I know who to thank for.
Well, yes. Well, those guys actually probably did for us because those had different people. People like Great Clips or places like that. They're actually quite a lot of good ones, but they're mostly a lot of it is revenue. It's a job, and they like what they do. They're hairstylists as well, but they're not the egotists that you get in the other business. And I don't mean egotistical. It's probably the wrong way. It's like their image as an artiste. When I was in the hair salon business, I loved the people there. It was so much fun working with those people because they weren't egotistical like the way maybe I made that sound. They were very committed to their clients as a rule. I mean, like 80-90%. But they had this other image sometimes that would get in the way, and we just let them, what's in it for me? Well, let's really make you better. Okay, thanks. I'll see some of you tomorrow, and some of you next week.
Thank you.
Or actually this afternoon.
Have a good week.
Take care.
Bye.